In Catholic ethics, understanding the human act is vital. The human act is our primary form of human expression. So our goodness, our evilness is expressed in terms of acts. So we don't really exist outside of our acts. We are acting persons, as Pope John Paul II would say. So in order to understand who we are as moral agents, we have to parse out the elements that constitute human acts, right? So to understand what I can be held morally responsible for in terms of what others want to hold me responsible for, and myself as a moral agent, right? I want to be able to understand all the different parts that make me a moral actor. So, for instance, let's just think of a couple of circumstances. Let's say you hear that I fatally pushed someone down the stairs. So I was in a hotel, I'm walking in the hallways, and I push someone and they fall downstairs and break their neck. Now, that seems to me objectively that that's a problem. Like that seems clear. But then you realize, when they look at the cameras, they realize I was sleepwalking. Now, that revelation changes something, right? So clearly someone has been pushed down the stairs, they broke their neck, they're dead. So something evil has happened. On the other hand, the fact that I was sleepwalking seems to have changed something. Is this an act? Does this rise to the level of an actual act? Is it an act for which I can be held morally responsible? Should I feel like I have done something wrong, right? How about a case of if I tell you that I intend to murder someone, and so I say I have the murder weapon, I'm ready to go murder someone. At the moment I have that intent, as authentic as it may be, is that the same thing as actually committing the murder? Is there a difference between intent and the actual accomplishing of that intent? So, for instance, there is a very popular movie, Minority Report with Tom Cruise, in which people are apprehended because of their intent to commit a particular crime. And of course, that's a question about, well, they intend to do, but they haven't actually done that. So, to what degree does intent actually play a role in the morality of our human acts? Then let's think of another example. What if you hear someone screaming, and you run around the corner, and you see me with an electric saw hacking off someone's leg? Well, not hacking, but I'm sawing off someone's leg. Of course, now you're horrified. Um, but then as you come closer, you realize that for two things. One is that um, I, maybe I have some identification that shows that I'm a doctor, specifically a surgeon, and then you see that this person's leg is infected. And so it's clear that I'm amputating the leg to save the person's life, right? So clearly something evil is being done here, right? I'm causing harm to the person. On the other hand, the circumstances and perhaps the intent have also changed things. So when we think about the human act, there are different elements, and we have to be able to think about what rises to the level of a human act. And then when we have an act, what are different elements that are part of that act that help us identify if something is moral or if it's not immoral? So first, we want to just to make a distinction. There are what we call acts, human acts, and there's what's been traditionally called um, the act of man or acts of man, right? Singular, plural, whichever one you like. So when we talk about an act of man or the acts of man, Um, these are biological processes, or sort of the instinctive type of things like breathing, sensory impulses, spontaneous psychological responses, right, that precede the activity of the intellect and the will, right? So that can be called an act of man. Let's say something happens and you have this initial response of anger, or sometimes something might happen. They have an initial response of sympathy, and then upon reflection realize, oh, I should not have been angry, or I should not have been sympathetic with that cause or that person. um, those we're moving to the side because those things are sort of responses. They're more like you responded at the time, and these are not acts that come from, say, choice. So when we talk of a human act, there are three components to the human act. There's what we call the moral object. Then you have to consider the circumstances. Circumstances as much part of an act as the actual physical action. And then, of course, there's the intent, or what's known as the subjective motive. So the moral object, this is the moral goal the act is aiming at. So first of all, we have to acknowledge in this case that there is an objective order, right? So that you can think of an order of good and evil. And if you want to think of it as a spectrum, as long as it's of a clear good, clear evil, a spectrum is fine. So we have to acknowledge that. And so what we're saying is that the moral object is the good or the evil of a human act. So it goes beyond just a physical action. It's what it's aiming at. So in some way, we want to measure up a physical act with where it fits on this good evil spectrum, so to speak, right? So the fact that I was walking in a hotel and I hit someone who fell downstairs and broke their neck. That's a case where we say physically something evil has happened. Okay, um, and we can say it's evil because a life has been taken, right? So we can measure that act in terms of the objective good and evil, right? So this is very important. The moral object, right? It's what's the moral goal and any particular act is aiming at. Now, the second part of assessing any human act are the circumstances. So the particulars of the situation that help determine the morality of an act. Okay, so we give the example of the case where you come around the corner and you see me sawing off someone's leg, and then you realize I'm a surgeon and I'm amputating the leg because I'm trying to help this person, right? So the circumstances also can influence how we understand an act and how we understand the morality of an act. And then the third piece is the subjective motive or the intent, the intention. So this is the authentic motive of an act, right? What's motivating this act? Now, it's important to note that a good intention cannot justify an intrinsically evil deed. So the intent is very important. So, for instance, in the case of sawing off someone's leg, and you realize that one, I'm a surgeon, and two, I'm doing this for the person's health. My intent is to provide to make them healthy. Okay, so that does factor in, and that changes everything. In the case where I fatally push someone down the stairs, right, you can argue, well, I was sleepwalking, and I had absolutely no intent to do anything harmful. Okay, so in that case, you can make a debate. Well, you can argue, well, clearly this doesn't rise to human act, and I should not be judged as such, right? Now, that's an example you could sort of push this further and ask a lot of questions and find some sort of level of culpability for me, right? Because something did happen. But what we're saying though is that I'm just trying to point out that it can be a little more complicated when something physical happens. We need to look at circumstances and look at the intent. Now, let me just end with this point. Now, what do we mean by something is intrinsically evil? Something's intrinsically evil when we look at these three pieces here, right? So, in terms of moral object, something evil has happened, right? That the physical act, we can just easily place it on the evil side of the ledger. Now, um, with this thing as intrinsically evil, what we're saying is that there are no circumstances that mitigate the evilness of this thing. So you can look at circumstances and nothing will change. It's still evil. And also, when we look at there are no amount of good intentions that could justify this act, right? So it's a case where you have the moral object is evil, and no circumstances and no intentions can justify or make it better. It's just evil in and of itself. So an example would be something like rape, right? There are no circumstances that would make rape justifiable. Some might argue, well, what if the a child was conceived in the rape and um, that child went on to invent the cure to cancer and millions of people's lives were saved. None of that would ever justify the rape, right? And the intention doesn't matter, right? The intention doesn't matter. It's just the moral object is evil in and of itself. Okay, so that's how we determine if something is intrinsically evil. So again, in terms of the human act, right, this is our primary form of expression as moral agents. We want to be able to identify what rises to the level of a human action, and we want to be able to parse out different elements of the act, and they are the moral object, the circumstances, and the subjective motive or the intention.